I oftentimes see people wearing T-shirts, upset about the loss of the library of Alexandria. You know, if only we could find out what happened to it, its mysteries and its books and so forth. What I'm going to offer you today is I'm going to give you way too much in the way of details. Okay, so you may be overwhelmed by how much information we do have on this library. I will cite sources if you want me to, and I do that anyway, because I'm a historian at heart. Well, I am in reality too. But the point of the matter is, after you finish listening to this talk, you're not going to only know about what happened to the library of Alexandria. You're going to know specifically the names of the librarians, who was there, how they did things, right down to the smallest details. Does that interest you at all? Is that what you're here for? So we will solve this mystery. We will start off with an overview on Alexandria, which was founded by Alexander the Great in 331. But obviously at first, it was a small city. It was a new town. And most of the people who were living there were soldiers, and merchants and mercenaries, and those who kind of collected around these new towns, high degree of prostitution, yada, yada. Okay, the point of the matter is it's a small town, and it's a new town. Now, nowadays, we think of a new town, and we think of, ooh, this is exciting, because we're so entrenched in the idea of progressivism, and what is modern is best and wonderful. But in the ancient world, all about tradition. The older the city is, the deeper the legacy, the better. And if that city doesn't have a great legacy, you just simply invent it. Don't make it up. We'll develop deep roots, because that matters. And each of these cities oftentimes talked about not only their great legacies, but what they're known for. Obviously, when you think of Athens, you think of what? Philosophy, right? Also Athena. City of Ephesus, greatest Artemis of the Ephesians, and so forth and so on. Every city has their something that is special. And here comes Alexandria. And what does it have that is special? It's sitting there in a virtual marsh. It's a brand new town full of soldiers and merchants and arriving artisans. What good is it? What can they contribute? And they really didn't have much. So they looked around and they said, you know what we have? We've got lots of weeds. We have lots of reeds. Okay, so you see where we're going with this, right? So they have what's called the papyrus plant. It's everywhere. It's, like I said, it's all along Alexandria, and that is the component to make paper. There's plenty of this raw resource growing everywhere. So Alexandria, before there's ever even a library, already gets involved in book production, in making books, in shipping out books. This has to be understood. And oftentimes, this is not talked about. And it's so easy to make. These books, basically, what you do is you take the papyrus plant, and you find the outer rind, and you remove it. And then you have the pith of the plant. And what you do is you cut the pith into long strips. Yeah, usually like 4 strips. And then you lay these together. It's all sticky, and you kind of overlap them a little bit. And then what you do is you then find another pith, cut them into strips, and then lay them at a right angle across the other one. And then you get a nice hammer, and you beat it down, right? And you put some glue in the mix, and then you smooth it over with a stone or a shell, and then you dry it out. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got paper. Well, that was hard. It wasn't difficult to make. We can make a lot of this in abundance. And guess what? The materials are free. It's everywhere to be found. So Alexandria found its thing. We have books. So what else can we do? Well, then of course, here comes a monarch. Is what happens? I'm not going to talk about Alexander the Great. He's great and everything else, but he dies in Babylon, and body is brought to Alexandria. It looks like I'm talking about it, but I'm not supposed to be talking about it. Anyway, there's division and there's fighting, and eventually you have the Attalids taking over certain areas. You have the Seleucids with their capital of Antioch taking over certain areas. Well, the area around Alexandria, it fell under the Ptolemies, all these warring generals. So Ptolemy the First takes control over Alexandria, and I'm so happy I said that within like 2.5 minutes, because usually it takes me 10 minutes to get through all that. And what happens is that he wants to really buttress this idea of this new product being important, but also he wants to use these books in connection to the accumulation of knowledge. Ptolemy the First is a historian by nature. In fact, he wrote a history of Alexander the Great. So naturally, he is interested in this kind of topic. But, so what he does is that he wants to have a think tank. He wants to gather together some of the best minds to be inside of his palace and to think and talk about things and strategies, how to, fight our enemies, usually the Seleucids. So what happens is we got to have something here for this particular think tank. And we need to have inspiration. Well, who inspires us? Well, in a metaphysical sense, who inspires us is the muses. That's right. Amusing, I know. Always amusing. Anyway, so what will happen is the dedication, the special wing that's added onto the palace will become known as it's dedicated to the muses, a museum. Now you're getting it. So it's a museum now. Well, wonderful. So now we have a museum. A museum is not much without scholars. You gotta have a think tank. You gotta have thinkers. Well, how in the world are you going to do this? I got to tell you something. Scholars have not changed since that time. How do you lure a scholar to come to Alexandria? Free lodging, free food. That's right. He advertised, if you come and you move to the Library of Alexandria, you can stay however long as you like. Well, sorry, it's called the museum at this time. You can stay however long as you like, but under certain conditions. First of all, you have to absolutely have students. At least one, they say, but you could have more, So at least students. You also have to talk to one another. So they make it mandatory for you to sit around and have dinner together at least once a day. Now, obviously, I'm sure they have some days off, because that would be pretty obnoxious after a while. But these dinners were based upon the symposium, and so they went well into the night, which brings up something else, and that is these scholars were allowed to have as much alcohol as they want. And as we know from Athenaeus and his sophists, we know that they had all different kinds of vintages that they enjoyed there and tried to experiment with. Oh, look, I gave a source. The point of the matter is yes, to make a scholar happy, free food, free lodging, and they can get as drunk as hell anytime they want. And as long as they have, of course, some students and talk to one another. Well, guess what? The idea worked. Scholars came in droves to the museum. Of course, it's the old saying, if you build it, it will come. So he had to really make it nice. So he created a wonderful portico with what's called exedras, et cetera, et cetera. What's an exedra? An exedra is like a little mini Odeon. Okay, nothing clear there either. It's a little area where there's steps that are circular that go into the walkway a little ways. And he built that along the colonnade. So the idea is There's, of course, a covered colonnade. So you're sitting there, maybe having a nice lunch and maybe quite a bit of wine, and you're walking with your students, and you want to talk about something. And so you're walking along this shaded colonnade. You get to one of those et ceteras. You have them sit around in a mini circle there, and then you pontificate and talk all about wonderful things that are on your mind, and do some question and answering and so forth, and debates, and there it is. And so it was facilitated with this in an architectural sense. And there were also various rooms and chambers, and they started to fill them up with, guess what? The one thing I didn't mention that scholars love. So they started filling these chambers with books. And so the museum evolved into the Library of Alexandria. Does that make sense? It's a gradual, what they would call museum and library, and they use this, it means the same thing. The problem is, you have some scholars that say the museum is separate from the library. That's absolutely ridiculous, because they sometimes use the same word in the same sentence. No, it's the same. They're one and the same. But this particular museum, which includes a library that keeps growing, is built inside the palace. This particular one, I want you to remember that. The first one is in the palace, because we're going to go somewhere else with this in a few moments. Yes, there's another one. And so we move along. Okay, so we go through this. Oh, wow. Okay, so they got to figure out who's going to be the librarian. Well, one of my favorite cities is Ephesus, and guess what? They picked the first librarian in charge of the Library of Alexandria from the city of Ephesus. So that's wonderful. And his name is Zenodas of Ephesus, and he becomes the director. They call him the Bibliofelix, which simply means the guardian of the books. He's described by the 10th century Suda as the director of the libraries in Alexandria, plural, although the Suda is later. It seems to be, we'll find out, we'll find supporting evidence about these libraries earlier on, so we'll go through that. And he was born and raised in the city of Ephesus, and he was given a very strict education before he went to Alexandria. Who taught him? His name is Philetus of Kos. I'm going to mention him because we'll hear his name again. Philetus of Kos. He was both a scholar and a poet, and he was very meticulous about word usage. And he drove him crazy is people using arguments with unsubstantiated evidence. He went crazy over this, and he brought that mindset to his pupil, Zenodas. In fact, it drove him so crazy that at only one point, he actually starved himself to death out of anger of these people who are not using evidence correctly. And he wasn't even satisfied with that. Philetus actually had on his epitaph the following: "Stranger, I am Philetus, the lying word, and night evenings carrying destroyed me," unquote. So the guy put it on his tombstone that he couldn't stand people who made undocumented claims. So that ethos then gets translated over to Zenodas of Ephesus. Can you imagine what kind of librarian this man will be? Extremely meticulous. In fact, he still influences us today, Zenodas. So here we go. But before we go on, now they have to, Zenodas is involved in arranging how in the world do we get more books? You're gonna love this. So they send their agents out throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, all armed with lots of coin, and they arrive at various ports, and they say, okay, we would like to make copies of your books. Okay. Now that seems reasonable. And so what will happen is that they will be invited in some cases to their local library or place to have archives. And the Alexandrians will copy off the text and then take that text back to Alexandria. But the Alexandrians sometimes are a little bit mischievous, because sometimes what they will do is they will take the original and leave them the copy, because they want the oldest version. And so what happens is that there's stories of them chasing them, saying, "Hey, you left us with a cheap copy." It's like, well, these things happen. But in other cases, these librarians, or these people who are seeking after these documents, will have some soldiers with them, and they will actually seize the documents and take them back to Alexandria. But good news, they still have some ethics. After making a copy, they'll give a copy back, they'll sail back with the copy version for the original city. So there you have it. So eventually, these will start to accumulate. I love the story where in Athens, the Alexandrians with their agents, they arrived in Athens, and they wanted to get copies of Sophocles, and as well as other playwrights. They wanted to have the original ones. And the Athenians said, "Okay, we'll let you take them back to Alexandria, but you have to give us what is the equivalent of $1 million as a deposit, and then for you to return it." So later on, these agents return back to Athens with cheap copies. And the Athenians are all, wait, we had $1 million deposit. Well, we'll go ahead and give you the $1 million then, because we always wanted the originals. So there you have it. So as you can imagine, these copies start to accumulate quite a bit during this period of time. There's so much emphasis on the originals. Now, what's going to happen is Xenodus is, as I told you before, he's very meticulous. And so he decides that the library needs to be organized according to categories. So he put together a section for philosophy, a section for science, a section for medicine, as well as other categories. Then he had another idea. He says, okay, he said, with each roll, at the end of the roll, we will have a tab. And on that tab, we will have the author's name and the ethnic, or where he is from. Like Xenodus of Ephesus is from, well, so the ethnic. And then, of course, at the same time, there will be some distinction if people have the same name and are from the same place. So if there's more than one copy of that document, then there will be also an addition of where they got it from, the provenance. So it will say from this town they got it, or from that town. Pretty meticulous. Good job, right? And then he said, okay, now what we're going to do is that we got to categorize this in also another kind of order. So let's see. What should we do? Oh, I get it. We're going to put it alphabetically. He's the first one to do so. And so the library was then organized, first time in world civilization, in alphabetical order. Now, given that it was only using the first letter only, and after that, so there's still kind of some loosey-goosey stuff going on. But by the 2nd century CE, they decided to use the 2nd and 3rd letter to determine. That means the books are still around. That means the books are still around. Okay, so much of the Julius Caesar story, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. This is interesting, right? So there you have it. So now this is the beginning. We still use this kind of idea today in categorization. Of course, each roll is called a book. Sometimes for a work, it includes several, like 24 for the Iliad, books, which are just rolls. What designates how long a roll should be? how long it should be until it starts to tear. Hey, look, it should be as long as it should be, but oftentimes it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to shorten it up because remember, you got to unroll all these and, see where they are. And the shorter the rolls, the easier it is to find the materials. Okay, so there you have it. So that's that. Now, well, who's going to be attracted? Let's get some names here. You guys ever heard of Euclid? That's right. He's one of the first scholars to show up with a hungry belly and ready for wine. That's right. The so-called father of geometry, although the idea existed long after that, before that, he's the one who really created a definitive work on geometry that would last through the ages. Where did this happen? This did happen at the Library of Alexandria. And so even Pappus notes that Polyaenus of Rhodes talked about this and how Euclid spent so much time there along with his students, where he thus, quote, acquired such a scientific habit of thought. Euclid's greatest achievement, of course, is creating the standard text on geometry that is so well written and so logically organized that is still a standard to this day. His proofs are easy to use and apply, enabling one to gain a mastery of geometry in a short period of time. After Ptolemy I had read Euclid's The Elements, he wondered if there was an easier way to grasp geometry. Euclid replied, "There is no royal route." You just have to, it's not always easy. Yeah, this work was so popular throughout the ages that here's a little bit of trivia you don't know. My father is a very famous Lincoln scholar, and he did a study of Abraham Lincoln's favorite books. Abraham's favorite books are as follows. Number 1, the Bible. Number 2, the collective works of William Shakespeare. And number 3, Euclid and his geometry. He carried it with him all the time. In fact, there are studies now going about the way he thought and organized himself when it came to the Civil War and various strategies was using Euclidean means of geometry. Divide and conquer, so to speak. But anyway, moving right along. A little fun bit of trivia there. So Euclid, well, that's kind of a big deal. Okay, so is there anybody else that arrived at this time? Well, yes. Strato, S-T-R-A-T-O. He believed, and now he's here hanging out there, he believed that all material objects consist of particles. What? All material is made out of particles. And we can't see it with the naked eye. And he's the one who advanced the idea of the atom in a theoretical sense. And he pushed this idea. And of course, this idea becomes very popular later on with various groups, including the Epicureans and the Stoics and so on and so forth. But I'm just throwing this one out here. He also said that everything in the universe is a combination of matter and energy. He also said there's a divine force is resident in nature. It contains the principles of birth, increase, decay, and that is God, and that's within nature. He says all these atoms connect to everything else, and there's different atoms for different things. Is this fascinating? And they operate different ways. He's purely theoretical. Where does he come up with these ideas? Guess where? The Library of Alexandria, along with Euclid. Okay, you're thinking, okay, so maybe this museum, this library is influential. We're not even to the best part yet. Okay, so we keep on going. How many people heard of Herophilus? Herophilus, 335 to 280. He arrived at the museum, once again, attracted to its advertisement. He trained at the famous medical island of Kos, which of course was established by Hippocrates. But what he did was considered unethical in other places, but he thought, you got to do it. He's the one who was the first one to bring human cadavers and to dissect them for medical reasons, to figure out how the body operated. He's the first one. This is the beginning. And the Library of Alexandria, as opposed to Kos, gave him the ability and the freedom to do so. So, there's a whole lot when it comes to Greek thought and dissecting bodies, and most of it's not very good. But Alexandria, for science. So what did he do? He distinguished between nerves and blood vessels. He tracked them throughout the body, and he charted them. He is the one who said, you know what? The heart doesn't decide anything. It's the brain. It's this mushy thing in our head that decides things. This is what works. But other things that he did, which were important, and by the way, he wrote this all down in 9 books that were deposited in the library. What he did is he's the one who studied the female reproductive system. He's the one who discovered the ovum. He's the one who today, if you take a look at various medical charts of the female parts, he's the one who named them. Don't think your gynecologist, don't tell him this. Anyway, moving right along. At the same time, he is also the one who cut through the eye, and he's the one who dissected the eye. He identified the cornea, the retina, the iris, the choroid, and he's also the one who gave us those names and showed how that worked. Is this pretty amazing stuff? This is the Library of Alexandria, and he lived from 335 to 280. So he's the first one there, and he's given the latitude to do his various experiments. Okay, and of course, he also had some interesting ideas when it comes to life. He maintained that a healthy life was eating well and getting plenty of exercise. Obviously, this is not true. Oh, wait. He says, when health is absent, wisdom cannot reveal itself, art cannot become manifest, strength cannot be exerted, wealth is useless, and reason is powerless, unquote. There he is. All right. Okay, we're only through the first director. I'm looking at my time, making sure. Okay, so we keep on going. You guys ready for more? It's not even the best part yet. All right, here we go. The next king of Egypt was Ptolemy II, 282 to 246, who was very much interested in zoology. Yeah, he loves zoology. So much so that he decided to create a zoo next to the museum so they could study the various animals. So there's exotic animals here, which had never been seen before, were objects of amazement, according to Diodorus Siculus. They had different kinds of animals there. Isidore Savea notes that this is where they called certain snakes boas, because they killed cattle and oxen by entwining themselves around the udders and sucking them dry. We have, of course, Pliny the Younger also mentioning this fact. So when you think of snakes, boa, that name, a lot of names for various animals start coming about at the Library of Alexandria as they're collecting them. He also decided to have a great procession of these animals. So he had every once a year, so he had them preside out of the museum. Elephants, antelopes, hartebeests, ostriches, zebras, wild asses. He had parrots, peacocks, and pheasants. The whole parade ended with a white bear, leopards, caracals, and of course, a rhinoceros and a giraffe. So that was at his museum. The museum that's connected to this Library of Alexandria, and the study of zoology then became very important at this time. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so at this time, we have now the Iliad and the Odyssey. They had many different versions of it, and Ptolemy II wanted one version. And so Zenodus of Ephesus, who is still there at this time, he lasted a long time. He says, what are we going to do about this? And so what happened is they put together the definitive version of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which we use to this day. It took all the various versions. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So, and they start doing this later on with other great Greek literature. We'll go through what those are when we get to them. But yeah, they start to go, we need to have one version because there's too many multiple versions. And then, of course, they're the ones who said, okay, we need to have it divided into precisely 24 books. If you know your Iliad and Odyssey history, Iliad, you'll see that there's some artificial means to make it into 24. Just kind of fun little things thrown in for good measure. Something else happened during this time under Ptolemy II that is so important for history, and that is as they're going through and editing the Iliad and the Odyssey, these are the holy works of the ancient Greeks. There's a large Jewish population in Alexandria at this time, so it was a decision of Ptolemy II to do the same thing, translating the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, into Greek, which is called the Septuagint. Happened here. We know that. Ptolemy II. Of course, the Babylon Talmud records King Ptolemy once gathered 72 elders. He placed them into 72 chambers, each of them in a separate one, without revealing to them why they were summoned. He entered each one's room and said, "Write for me the Torah of Moses, your teacher." God put it in the heart of each one to translate identically all the others as they did. And so supposedly they came all back together out of their 72 rooms, and all the texts magically matched. It's a miracle. The Septuagint is inspired. And so it was. The Septuagint, its translation is the basis of the New Testament. There's only a few quotations that come from any other place. When the New Testament is quoting from the Hebrew Bible, in most cases, it is from the Septuagint, not the Hebrew translation or the Aramaic. There are three exceptions. Other than that, that's it. But see, the problem is, or the good news, I don't know, depending on your perspective, is when you translate something from vague Hebrew into specific Greek, which has lots of words, you're going to add things to it. And a lot of the philosophical nuances fell into the text of the Septuagint. It gets into the New Testament, and then it's understood by the early church fathers. That's why a lot of them are Platonists. Anyway, fun stuff, maybe learning too much, but there you have it. So this is very important when it comes to the studies of early Christianity, as well as Hellenistic Judaism. And once again, in the Library of Alexandria, and you're thinking, wait a minute, yes, Epiphanius notes in 392. And so the scriptures, when they have been translated to the Greek language, were placed in the first library, which is built in the Bruchon, as I've already said. And there arose, in addition to this library, a second one in the Serapeum called its daughter. Anyway, there you have it. So yes, we know it's there. Is this good? You guys having fun yet? All right, and the fun hasn't stopped. So moving right along, maybe, we go into, there's a certain Olympus of Cyrene, and he arrives, and he's prominent there. And actually what happens is that he started off and he lost all his money before he got to Alexandria, and he had to support his family. He was a poor teacher in a very humble situation, and basically starving to death. He's going, you know what? I think I can go to Alexandria, swallow my pride. He gets there, and he's good at what he does. And so what he does is that he decides to create a catalog of all known Greek writings, which is a mammoth undertaking. In fact, the full title is almost as long. It's called The Tables of Persons Eminent in Every Branch of Learning, together with a list of their writings. That's the title. They summed it up as tables, pedeix in Greek. He wrote, it took 120 books to include his entire list of all these books that they had. He divided the collection into two basic categories, poetry and prose, and then subdivisions. For poetry, it was epic, tragedy, comedy, lyric. For prose, he broke it down to history, literature, science, medicine, which defined these areas a little bit further. Then what he did is that he listed each author. Here he goes. And each author then had a summary of who he is and what books he wrote. So, for example, he'll have Eudoxus, father of Schenes of Canudos. I'm reading actually from one of his identifications. It says astronomer, physician, legislator. He studied geometry under Archytas and medicine under Philistian of Sicily. Pretty good, huh? That's the notation. And so he goes on. These tables were obviously help organize the library, but also he came up with another idea. He said, you know what? Callimachus believed literary artists should be free of constantly copying the style of Homer. He says, we need to break free of all that. We need to create something new, something fresh. He declared that artists should, quote, drive their wagons on untrodden fields, unquote. We need to investigate new ideas, new ways of thought. Callimachus claimed he had a vision of the god Apollo, who told him to fatten his flocks, but to keep his muse slender. Fatten his flocks, keep his muse slender. And then somebody says, I don't understand what you're saying. And he says, big book, big evil. Mega biblion, mega kakon. He actually said that. So big book, big evil. Oh, okay, we get it now. So if you're going to say something short, make sure it's creative, but that's better than making it really long and bombastic, especially the word bombastic. Moving. Okay, so Callimachus, he also wrote various other works, but it cost him because his rival was a guy by the name of Apollonius of Rhodes. Apollonius of Rhodes is very famous. You guys have ever heard of Jason and the Argonauts? That's Apollonius of Rhodes, and the two were rivals. Actually, Callimachus was the teacher some of the time of the other, but oh well. What happens? They fought back and forth constantly. Apollonius of Rhodes. We actually have even poetry that they wrote as opposing to each other. They fought one another. At one point, Apollonius of Rhodes gets kind of thrown out of Alexandria, but he improves his Jason Argonauts, and then he arrives back again, and everybody loves it and makes Callimachus real unpopular. And a long story short is they choose Apollonius of Rhodes to be the next director over Callimachus. So the next director of the museum is the famous author of Jason the Argonauts. Did you guys know that? So there you have it. Basically what he wrote down, there's a few other things I want to say. Oh, yeah, wait. I'm reading right now insults between the two of them. Wait, Callimachus said that he has, that his noggin is made out of mahogany. So, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. These are just fun reading some of these going back. So we basically have one of the earliest literary fights going back and forth, and it's very entertaining for people to watch them fight amongst each other. So Apollonius now becomes the director, and he creates his Argonautica. And who's going to be attracted during this time? You guys ever heard of Archimedes? Yeah. So Archimedes, he's from, of course, Syracuse. But what happened is, guess what? Not a lot of creative opportunity there. Once again, they're basically using him, these dictators of Syracuse, and he wants to go kind of do his own thing. He wants to have freedom, just like the earlier one when it came to medical practices. Alexandria was a great place to be because there's no censorship. You could think outside the box without any limitations. That's what drew people there. Well, and free food, free wine, free lodging, and all the books. But that also, having the freedom of thought was also a great contribution. Obviously, the Archimedes screw, as well as his means of figuring out volume, but that would be another volume of information. Moving right along, Ptolemy III, 246 to 232, was the next patron of the museum, and this is where he has an idea. You know, what's better than having one library? Let's have two. That's right. He's the one that came up with the idea of two libraries in Alexandria. This is going to answer lots of your questions when it comes to the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Which one? So you'll see throughout the ages, when one burns, the other supplies copies. When the other burns, the other supplies copies. You got two. That's a smart strategy by any means. And you're going to see this, and I'll document it as we go along the way, but it should be pretty interesting. So the Temple of Serapis was then open to the general public, but there is a slight difference in the number of volumes. The Library of Alexandria, Library of Alexandria, what? There you go, Matt Wedge. The Library of Alexandria, there we go, and my voice got lower, had 490,000 books. 490,000 books. The library at the Temple of Serapis had 42,800. See a difference? A little bit. So the 490,000 for the one, the museum that's next to, well, connected to the palace. And the Temple of Serapis one is 42800. Hope that helps. So you're going to have a variance in numbers. Obviously, the Serapeum is a lot smaller because it covered a smaller space. We have Johannes Tzitzes in the 12th century, who also keeps a list. And he says, well, they're numbered 400,000 mixed rolls inside the palace quarter, 90,000 unmixed rolls, with another 42,800 outside, making a total of 532,800 scrolls. And that's from his Prolegomonia. So we have some numbers here, and he's, of course, quoting earlier sources from that. Is this interesting? So now we know how many volumes that are there. You did notice that they mentioned 42,800 outside. That would most likely be the Serapeum. You did notice also 90,000 unmixed rolls that are not designated to be either one. Where are those? Okay, so I'm going to go into this quickly. What they did is that it had warehouses. And these warehouses were located by the harbor. And these unmixed rolls were there. They also had by the harbor, as we know from the primary sources, is that people would arrive with these various books from all over, and they go through a sifting process before they're deposited in either one of the libraries. But beyond that, these warehouses were meant for export. Remember, people always forget Alexandria is the center of book production. These books are going out throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, and they're constantly being shipped out all over. And so we got to remember there are tons of books that are constantly being shipped out and end up in places like Ephesus, as we know, places like Delos, as we know, places like Athens, as we know, as recorded, places like Rhodes, as we know, places like Rome. Are you guys getting the point? So there's a lot of books going on. They're not all a library, but there's lots of books. And again, it's the center of book production. Okay. So Ptolemy III, he was frustrated about not having the earliest versions of Secundus and Sophocles and Euripides. He is the one who grabbed it from Athens, and for $1 million, he let them keep their deposit and whatever. The point of the matter is that he's the one who created the definitive version of these playwrights. So the versions we have of these great masters of tragedy and comedy and satire are from the Library of Alexandria. All right, well, moving right along. Of course, 6,000 drachmas worth. Okay, moving on. So now Ptolemy III, as we go here, we'll suddenly, of course, obviously have another director that will arrive, and you're going to love this guy. I mean, we're not even to the best. We're still not at the best part yet. You're thinking, what? Aristophanes, not Aristophanes, but Aristophanes, Eratosthenes, was the next librarian, his next head. He was ridiculed. They called him Beta. They called him the B-man as opposed to Alpha because he was a master. He was actually good at so many different areas, but supposedly not the master of all. So they call him the B guy, the Beta guy. I don't think that's fair. Aristophanes was the one to calculate the entire circumference of the world. He's the first one to do so. From calculations he made in Egypt, first Alexandria, in comparison to a town known as Cyrene in Aswan today. He wanted to know, and he did know, the exact mathematical position of the sun at its zenith in Alexandria during the summer solstice. And of course, hearing that the sun was blocked by a deep well in the other location, Aswan, Aristophanes decided to make a calculation of the sun at its zenith during the summer solstice at this town, which happened directly on the Tropic of Cancer. He made his measures, and he, of course, triangulated it, and he realized that there's a difference between the two, and he calculated that. What did he get? He said the circumference of the earth, as he saw it, was 24,900.8 miles. 24,900.8 miles. So, that's what he got, and I'm sorry, it's 24,902. Wait a second. Wait, that's pretty good. Hey, that's 2 miles. It matters. Okay. The point of the matter is, he did it. The world is round. Is this good? Library of Alexandria. Are you amazed yet at this knowledge? Then he decided to make a map of the known world. This map had the Mediterranean. It looks very much like the Mediterranean as it is today. Of course, France is the land of the Celts. Britain is on the map. There's an island that is called Ireland, I-E-R-N-E, which is exactly where Ireland is. This is fascinating. There is a place called Thule in the north. It looks like Sweden, sticking down. The Black Sea is exactly accurate. The Caspian Sea is accurate. There's even the rivers on the steppes. North Africa is very accurate, with the Nile's course along the Red Sea. The Arabian Peninsula, Iran, called Irana, is represented. Afghanistan, Bactria, is on this map. India is on this map, with both the Indus and the Ganges being represented. The island of Ceylon is there, and then the map goes blank. But hey, that's a nice, large part of the world that is known. If that's not enough, he created a calendar based upon his measurements of the ecliptic about the Earth and came up with, 365 days for a year, but also determined every fourth year there should be 366 days. And so there should be a leap year. This idea would later leap in to Julius Caesar, who also used the same library. We'll go into that for information. We'll even have the name of the person who did that. This is fascinating. And so this is where these calculations take place. Also, he came up with other things, including the sieve of Aristophanes, which is an algorithm that is still used to identify prime numbers. Brilliant guy. So much for being the beta guy. I see him as the alpha guy. Let's give him credit there. Okay, so what will happen now is that next you have the reign of Ptolemy IV. Aristophanes continued to be the librarian. Under Ptolemy V, he's kind of a 5-year-old. You're going to have kind of a lot of problems going on. Tumultuous period in Alexandrian history. During this time, the person in charge of the library, his name is Aristophanes of Byzantium. He was the director in charge from 205 to 185. Every one of you uses what this person came up with every single day. Ooh, dramatic pause. Of course, it's a dramatic pause intentionally. Why? What did he come up with? Well, he came up with the idea of what's called distinctions. He said that, you know what? When we read sentences, we don't know how long to take a breath in between each one. We don't know when to stop or when to pause. We need to create a system to determine that. So especially for poetry, but also for prose. So if it is a short pause, we're going to put together a dot that is placed in the mid-level, and we're going to call that a comma, using that exact word. If it's a longer pause, we're going to put the dot on the bottom at the end of this word unit, and we're going to call it a colon, using that exact word. And then if it's a complete stop, we're going to put the dot on top at the end, and we're going to call that a periodus, which is a period. Our punctuation system arises from the Library of Alexandria. Is that fascinating? Well, we really are influenced by it. You're seeing this zoology and mathematics and all these areas, categorization. There's more still. Aristophanes also created something that says, you know what, we need to know where to put the accent. There should be a mark. He's the one that came up with the accent marks over various words, which then later on during the Byzantine period, he used too much in the Greek language. Sorry. So accents are everything. Anyway, but there you have it. Is that making sense? So you're going to have that coming about. All right. Well, Aristophanes also fixed up the Iliad and the Odyssey, wanted to make it even better when it came to the versions, so he did that. Aristophanes, he hated people who did what's called plagiarism. One time they had various speeches, and he became very angry. He said, all of you are committing plagiarism except for one of you. And they didn't believe him. So he walked into the library and replying just on memory from certain bookcases, produced an armful of rolls showing exactly which passages they had claimed as their own and reading it verbatim. That's a great librarian. What a hero, I tell you. Okay, I made my point. Okay, so moving on, we have, of course, now competition. Eumenes the third, the king of Pergamum in Asia Minor, says, oh yeah, well, if they can have a library, so can we. And so arrives the competition. And so they create their own special library that's located next to the Temple of Athena, which is pretty fitting. I have actually been and walked through the rooms of this particular temple, or what? The library, what they identify as the library, which seems to fit as much as 200,000 books. So there you have that. So of course, what will happen is Alexandria says, you're not going to get any paper from us. And Pergamon says, well, that's fine. we'll just use our own invention, which is not an invention at all. They made of course, parchment. They made parchment way beyond this, but maybe they made a special kind of parchment, which is basically animal skins that are, obviously wiped down, cleaned down, and dried and everything else. That became their paper, a lot more expensive. But Pergamon practiced then the art of parchment making. Meanwhile, of course, Alexandria was still shipping out all of the papyrus. I want to make a comment that will matter a little bit later on. I will say this, and that is parchment lasts longer. Papyrus does not last longer. All right, just keep that in mind as we go there, okay? So papyrus doesn't last as long. It's like one of those situations where it hits the air, like, it crumbles. After many centuries, you're going to be very careful, especially the archaeologists, the Oxyrhynchus, and I'll just meant to be very careful as they go through each layer. Parchment tends to last a lot longer. This has a bearing on the Library of Alexandria in a way that seems pretty mundane, but you'll see later. Okay, so now this is Pergamon does this, and there's kind of a competition between the two. In fact, what will happen is Aristophanes of Byzantium, he wanted to become their librarian, and they actually threw him in jail so he wouldn't join the Pergamon. Maybe he's not getting enough perks. Okay, so moving right along. So what will happen is that now we're entering a period of time where there's lots of controversy. But what will happen is that Pergamon has a library. Why can't Miletus have one? Hey, Miletus has one. Why can't Rhodes have one? Hey, Rhodes has one. Athens should have had this one a long time ago. Hey, Athens has one. Ephesus is one. And all of a sudden, you have this multiplicity. Meanwhile, Rome goes, hey, we're going to have one too. And everybody's now making their own libraries, and they're all over. So Alexandria becomes less unique as this idea spreads throughout. I've actually visited not only the library of Celsus in Ephesus, but I've also visited the library of Nyssa and seen where they put in the wooden cases into the wall, still preserved, and it's on 3 stories high. Pretty amazing. They had a stairway apparently that rolled from all different areas with a small porch on the sides. But wow, pretty exciting stuff. All right, the next director is Aristarchus. What does he do? I mean, he can't possibly do something more amazing than inventing punctuation. Well, what he did is he went through the various literary writings of the Greeks, and he says, you know what? Let's go over and explain the various words and what they mean and what the passages mean. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write in between each sentence connections, not only what the words mean, but where these ideas come from. We're going to talk about this. He invents the commentary. You want to read a commentary? So he's went through and he created commentary versions of various classical works. And you're thinking, okay, you can't go beyond that. Oh yeah. So then what he does, same guy, Aristarchus, what he does is that he's inspired by a certain Philetius, who we met earlier, the guy that was against people who were not meticulous enough and who lied and plagiarized, anyway, basically what he did, Philetius, he wrote a work called Miscellaneous Words, where identified a series of words and their origins and meanings in no consistent order. So what Aristarchus does is goes, you know what I'm going to do? This has no order. I'm going to put it all in alphabetical order. So we have the word, and then we have the definition. He invented the dictionary. Okay, now you're sitting there going, wow, it looks like all the literary arts come about because of the Library of Alexandria. Yes, they do. That's why it's so important. And those ideas then spread to all these other libraries. So that we are talking about the establishment of the Library of Sciences. Okay. So he also creates something that's called a lexicon too. he invented that. So commentary, dictionary, lexicon, all the same guy, Aristarchus. Thank you so much for that contribution. I'm going to read you one. It's for fun. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, we have a lot of these still left, quoted by other scholars. Here it is. The word is Melegia. I'm reading his definition. A Scythian beverage. It's good. Glaucus, in his first book of descriptions of places lying toward the left of the Black Sea, says as follows. When the drivers agreed, he dismissed the assembly, and they, dispersing each to his own house, prepared a Melegia. The definition still continues. This drink is more intoxicating than wine. It is made of honey boiled with water, with the addition of a certain herb. For their country produces much honey and also beer, which they made out of millet. Period. That's it. Pretty good. What do you think? Doesn't it sound like a modern dictionary description? It's real well done. Sometimes they're shorter, though. For the word melodia, he writes absolute term for tragedy, and then he says, see Callimachus's commentaries. Yeah, the idea of see this, see that, documentation like that, that's the Library of Alexandria. Well, are you guys overwhelmed yet with all this information? There's a lot going on here. Of course, Dionysius Thrax was there, 170 to 90 BCE. What did he put together? He put together the very first grammar book for a language, a systematic grammar book, and that was still used by the Greeks even into the 4th and 5th century CE. He put this together. Grammar books. Yeah, thank you again, because there needs to be a more systematic way of learning these kinds of things. Okay, well then, unfortunately, we get somebody to the throne, Ptolemy the 8th in 145. Since smart people did not support him, I'm saying this intentionally, he wanted all the smart people gone. Okay, so what happened is that basically a brain drain going on in Alexandria because they didn't support his rule. He was, well, first of all, he was just, he's very much an autocrat, belligerent, and did lots of terrible things. And basically scholars were against him, so he expelled philosophers, mathematicians, musicians, painters, athletic trainers. This is a list. Athletic trainers. How could they be a threat? Okay. Physicians and other men of skill in their profession, according to Athenaeus and the Sophists. They just throw them all out. So who's going to be the new head of the Library of Alexandria? He chose a certain Sidus of the spearman. He made one of his soldiers. Hey, you're in charge. So for a while, Alexandria is not doing very well. But don't worry, it comes back, it goes back again. And by the time we get to the 1st century CE, you're going to have Didymus of Alexandria, which is 63 to 10 CE. And he took on many different challenges. He again summarized all Greek literature. He did so in 4,000 books. It was given the name Bronze Guts. Okay, so obviously these would probably be scrolls as opposed to actual books in our sense, because that would exceed the number, maybe too big. So let's get to Julius Caesar. Let's get into this conspiracy. The story goes that Julius Caesar, one of the versions of the destruction of the library, Julius Caesar burned the Library of Alexandria. At least one of the versions. That's pretty great. Unfortunately, nobody at the time knew about it. But, so here we go. Yeah, so in 48 BCE, he chased Pompey and his allies to Egypt. The civil war divided the land between Ptolemy the 13th, and of course his older sister, who we know as Cleopatra. In the middle of the chaos, the Egyptians seized the ships in the harbor of Alexandria. thereby cutting off any potential supplies arriving from outside of Egypt. And it did jeopardize Caesar's abilities to receive reinforcements. In response to this threat, Caesar, quote, according to him, in the civil wars, burned all these vessels and those in the dockyards, since he could not protect so wide an area with his small fleet, unquote, Book 3, 111. Okay, so Caesar then seized Pharos Island with the lighthouse. He liked that, although he destroyed everything else in the island. He liked the lighthouse and used that for his procession later on. According to Florus, Caesar was so impressed with the lighthouse that he ordered a mini recreation of it. According to Aelius Hirtius, one of his lieutenants, he states that Alexandria is almost completely secure against fire. The buildings have no carpentry or timber and are composed of masonry and constructed in arches and roofed with rough cast or flagstones, he mentions in his Alexandrian War. He also discussed how they used 10-story highly mobile siege towers against the walls. But after that, they took the city. And guess where Caesar spent the night? He spent the night in the palace. Wait, the library is located in the palace. No, but Dr. Rietveld, the library burned down. I don't think Julius Caesar is going to be spending the night in a burned down building. It did not burn down. It did not. Then, of course, in 24, Strabo came to Alexandria. He also mentions, all still intact, quote, the inner royal palaces, which are continuous with those on Lucaeus and have groves and numerous lodges painted in various colors. He described the palace as the quarters still being there. It was still there. The only place he mentioned any destruction is on Pharos Island. That's 24 BCE. Again, hello, no fire. Are you seeing that? It didn't happen. Wait. So then you have in the 1st century CE, I love tracking this down, sorry. You have Lucan between 38 to 65, who all of a sudden, hey, he's a poet, he starts to spin. He says, nor did the fire fall upon the vessels only. The houses near the sea caught fire from the spreading heat, and the wind fanned the conflagration, the fire, till the flames, smitten by the eddying gale, rushed over the roofs as fast as meteors that often trace a furrow along the sky, though they have nothing solid to feed on and burn by means of air alone. But he doesn't mention the fire at the library. But something happened now. Now all of a sudden, while one of the soldiers there saying, you know, nothing burned, now you're having somebody saying, hey, something burned, and it started to spread. So guess what happened? Start people thinking, if it spread, maybe it burned the books. So we get to the next, this is 100 years later, by the way, this is written. Okay, so then you get to Seneca the Younger, who mentions this, and he mentions the fact that a number of books and libraries whose titles their owners can hardly read were destroyed. So now Seneca takes this leap and adds also 40,000 books were burned in Alexandria. They had been collected merely for ostentatious display. Wait a second, 40,000 books? Hey, that fits the miscellaneous books that we heard numbered earlier. That's not in the Serapeum. That's not in the palace. That's in the same dock areas we talked about. Bingo, is that pretty interesting? So it looks like there are books in the docking area that were burned, but that's not the Library of Alexandria. Is this cool? Let's keep on going. I love this. So now we get to the time of Hadrian. Finally, during the time of Hadrian, we have people talking about the fact that many battles occurred between the two forces, with the results of the docks and the storehouses of grain among other buildings were burned, and also the library. Wait, this is the first mention of it. This is 200 years later. Is this interesting? So what's happening here is called rumor. But there are other things happening at the same time. Meanwhile, how many does Seneca and others mention? It's always 40,000. Well, we know there's way more than 40,000. It's the same group of miscellaneous books that we saw earlier. Okay, so the books didn't burn. You guys got that. So, in fact, the best example of evidence that the books didn't burn is business continued as usual. What do you mean? They continue to have librarians. They continue to have meetings. They continue to have symposiums as business as usual, written during the 1st century into the 2nd century. So we still have them. So kept on going. For example, Didymus was a director during the time of Julius Caesar, and Pliny the Elder also mentions the fact that business was going on as usual. He also mentions a famous thinker there known as Sosigenes of Alexandria, who was connected to 3 main schools: the Chaldean, the Egyptian, and the Greek. And he is the one, of course, who suggested the idea of leap year going to Julius Caesar. This is where the connection goes, which goes back to Aristophanes. Well, a little earlier, I forgot to mention, in 41 BCE, Mark Antony decided to give his love Cleopatra a very special gift, and that was the 200,000 volumes from the Pergamon library. And it says, and in addition to the current library. So wait a minute, so that current library was still there, Antony says, hey, Cleopatra, you know that rival, Pergamon had a great library? Well, guess what? You're getting that collection. Yay. A lot of people said, oh no, Mark Antony did that to replace the burned down volumes. They lost all these volumes and that's why he's doing it. No, there's no evidence for that. It's an addition too. But hey, nobody reads Greek anymore. Moving right along. So we keep on going. Is this fun? So it continued going on during that time. You have another person at the library during the 1st century. His name is Chaeremon of Alexandria, who was a superintendent of the Goddard Library of the Temple of Serapis as well. He was a priest. He wrote various works on the mysteries, especially Egyptian astrology. Also, he said that the Egyptian religion was actually the worship of simply nature, stories to be understood as allegories, typologies, underlining this understanding. He wrote many works. And an emperor by the name of Claudius Caesar, he decided that, you know what? Let's have yet another addition to the Library of Alexandria, and we're going to name it after me, and my Etruscan history is to be read there each year from beginning to end. So there, according to Suetonius. So you have now yet another. So it looks like this library is not only not destroyed, it's getting bigger. It's expanding in size. In fact, in 79 CE, according to Cassius Dio, the Octavian building, or the portico of Octavia, together with those books, were destroyed. So in 81, what will happen is the Emperor Domitian, according to Suetonius, provided for having the libraries, which were destroyed by fire, renewed at very great expense, seeking everywhere for copies of the lost works, and sending scribes to Alexandria to transcribe and to correct them, unquote. So still going strong, and those books were then brought to Rome, the copies. Well, then, of course, according to the Historia Augusta, Hadrian, when he toured the area, what he did is Philostratus notes that he put one of his favorites as director of the Library of Alexandria because he wanted to have, get this, free meals at the museum, unquote. Everybody loves this free food. You gotta love it. According to the Oxyrhynchus Papyrus from 173 CE, it describes, of course, the purchase of a boat by a certain Valerius Diodorus, who is described as a member of the museum. We have even more documentation. It goes on for forever. Athenaeus in 232 CE also writes about the library. So you're getting the point. So, okay, Dr. Rietveld, when is this thing going to get destroyed? I mean, it just keeps on going. Okay. So what will happen is that, unfortunately, the palace one is destroyed, not the Serapeum. And I'm going to give you the most likely year in 273 CE. 273 CE, when Aurelian recaptured the city, much of the palace district was indeed destroyed. In fact, the historian Ammianus Marcellinus writes that quarrels of the citizens turned into deadly strife, and her walls were destroyed, and she lost the greater part of the district called Bruchen, which had long been the abode of distinguished men, including Aristarchus, eminent in thorny problems of grammatical lore. And of course, continues, the wealthy businessmen and leaders of the revolt were described as owning, quote, so many books that he used to often say in public that he should support any army on paper and glue. Okay, anyway, moving around. So we're having books being destroyed, but this whole palace is laid low. In fact, it is so destroyed, it even gets overwhelmed again in 298. Another destruction, which completely destroys. So if it wasn't destroyed in 272, it was destroyed in 298 because the rest of the area was then laid flat completely, to the point by 390, it was outside the city walls, and anchorites lived there. And slowly but surely, the area was taken over by water, and today, the section of the palace is now currently underwater of Alexandria. So it was turning into marsh, though, already in the late 300s into the 400s, and I find that interesting. Okay, so you're thinking, okay, well, what about, we still have the Serapeum. So the daughter library keeps on going. It is not destroyed. They still have, again, they don't talk about the museum as much until we get to the latter half of the 300s. Then they start talking about the museum again, which I find is interesting. We'll go there in a few moments. But what will happen is as follows, is that Constantine the Great arrives, and he wants to have a library of Constantinople. So what he does is that he starts making copies of various books of Christian literature, as well as early church fathers, to fill this new library. But Constantius, his son, has other ideas. He ruled from 337 to 361. He hired a scholar by the name of Themistus, and Themistus was placed in charge of collecting all the copies for the Library of Constantinople. And so, by the way, Themistus remained a pagan until the very end of his days, and he was allowed to bring in any book he wanted. So what he did is Themistus, what he did is he went to the Library of Alexandria, and he started to have their collection copied on parchment and then placed into the Library of Alexandria. Are you guys getting my point? Okay, so that's, of course, but which library is this? Well, this would have to be the one at Serapeum, because already the one at the palace is gone. Does that make sense? So this is being copied down in Constantinople. And one interesting factor is parchment survives and papyrus starts breaking apart. And so what's going to happen is that the copies in Constantinople stay and remain longer, while the maintenance in the Library of Alexandria of keeping these things together are not so good, and they start to crumble. Right, guys? So it actually starts to disintegrate, unless the upkeep. They've lost a lot in the way of finances. If you know the history of Alexandria during the 200s and 300s, it's not a great century, 2 centuries to live in for them. It's like construction every 30 years, and lots of problem when it comes to infrastructure. But there you have it. But then what will happen is that the Library of Constantinople, this is good, it will have 120,000 books. And these are copies. but on parchment from the Library of Alexandria. This Library of Constantinople burned in 473. And you're thinking, oh, no. No. The majority of the books were not only rescued from the flames, but because they had a great catalog list of all the books, they were able to replace the rest of them within 3 years and reestablish another library. Wait, this is a part of the Library of Alexandria, now in Constantinople, placed on parchment, which is a long-lasting material. Yes, it continues on in Constantinople. In fact, we know it's alive and well. Even in 680 CE, at the Sixth Ecumenical Council of Ephesus, there's a certain Agathon the Reader, who was a librarian at this establishment, and he was designated as a notary for the meeting. So when did this library disappear? God, this is awful. The year 1204. Thank you, Fourth Crusade. It was the West, the Latin West, that destroyed the remnants of the Library of Alexandria. You just can't make this up. Is this sad? This is where we lose the knowledge, although fortunately a lot of that knowledge was already being transferred over to the West gradually. But this is where the burning goes about. Okay, so let's flash back and let's move over back to Alexandria. So you have the Serapeum, it's continuing. What happens there? Well, unfortunately, what happens there is Theodosius the Great, who's probably not that great, orders the destruction of the Serapeum in the year 391, and it is destroyed, it's pulled apart, and that's the end of the library. Maybe. What do you mean, maybe? Okay, we know there are 2 members, according to various writings. Aphanius as well, and that we know for a fact that a certain Theon was involved in this museum during the 300s, and of course his daughter. I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of her before, but her name is Hypatia of Alexandria. She was associated with the museum, and you're going, Dr. Rietveld, where are you going to find this evidence? Well, you see, the fun part is that she wrote her students, and even though her writings don't survive, Synesius, great name, his writings survive, and he records that fact. Yay! And even describes some of the statues that survived. Wait a second, but it's after 391. What does that mean? And they call it the museum again. That means after the destruction of the Serapeum, those tenacious Alexandrians created yet another museum. You gotta love them. And that continues, although I'm sure the books were in a decrepit state of repair. I'm sure it was nothing like it ever was. And so, of course, you're going to think to yourself, okay, and so this is when the Muslims destroy the Library of Alexandria and they get the works of Aristotle. You know, suppose a story that happened in 640 where we blame Islam. Yeah, where's that source? What do you mean? So, well, the earliest source I find for the supposed destruction of the Library of Alexandria in 640 is from Abd al-Latif, who died in 1231. 1231. In his account of Egypt during the 12th century. You mean he didn't? And the second source arrives from Bishop Gregory Bar Hebraeus, who lived from 1226 to 1286. He's called Abba la Faraj in Arabic. His story about the destruction, he's from again, this is the 13th century. By the way, kind of irony that these people are from the 13th century, the very century which saw the actual remnants of this library destroyed in 1204 by the Crusaders in Constantinople. Just throwing that one in for free. Anyway, and it's full of errors. He says Caliph Omar is made to say that John of Byzantium, if those books are in agreement with the Quran, we have no need of them. If they're opposed to the Quran, destroy them. The problem is that John of Byzantium also known as John the Grammarian, lived in the 6th century and was long dead by the time the Muslim came into the picture. It's full of total errors. It's a fabrication, fake news. It's not true. Got it? Wow. You woke up. So this is an anti-Muslim work. And the other is just way too late. You're going, okay, well, this is really disappointing. I mean, the great Library of Alexandria kind of fell apart because of bad maintenance and copied off in parchment by the Library of Constantinople. And it was preserved and continued to the time of the Crusades. And as the Crusaders have destroyed it, yeah. Oh, is there any hope? There is still hope, because one more little bit. Some of these volumes got connected to the Academy of Athens. And Justinian, while he closed the Academy of Athens, these scholars then moved with all their books to a place called Nisbis, crossing over into the Parthian Empire. Good news, Muslims arrive. That's good news. And they actually acquire, during the Umayyads, these collections. These end up in Damascus, but they also end up in Babylon, in the great golden house of the Abbasids. And these works are there. And who destroys them? Guess who? That's right. Yes, of course, the Mongols. So there you go. So this knowledge, although I have to say, gets disseminated in various places in Greece, places in all over the Eastern Mediterranean. And so much of the remnants of these great works still survive today. Sometimes very, very small, like only one text survived in many cases. But so much of the knowledge of the Library of Alexandria does survive today. In fact, I know the names of a lot of those works. I have behind me over 3,000 works. Seriously, if I keep moving the camera, if I can't, because I have a screen here, it would just keep on going and 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 going. You're getting my point. And I have it's triplicate. And a lot of these books I know for a fact were there, and they're still there. And the problem is, and I have another stack here. You can see there, these are all in Greek, all these texts all the way to the floor. The problem is we have the works. Here's the problem. Nobody wants to read them. We have these works. We have these mysteries. We have so much in the Library of Alexandria. I can give you a list of titles you can start reading right now. You just got to learn Greek and you're on your way. But the problem is nobody wants to read them. So when you see somebody wearing one of these T-shirts, they're so upset about it. Maybe put together a list, get them started reading some of these great works because they're still around to this day. Sure, we lost a lot, but we have the biggest, greatest works. Most of them have survived, and classicists have it, and it's pretty exciting. But again, nobody reads it. And so I hope I have solved the mystery of the Library of Alexandria. Does that answer a lot of your questions? Maybe too many of your questions? Maybe I covered it, I think, pretty well. And you can see that if somebody says about the destruction, you can say questions like, which one? And when? And then, of course, you can give them also boring reasons where, parchment is a much better surface to write on than papyrus, which is basically you're writing on weeds. That's going to last a long time. Well, I hope you learned a lot. Thank you so much. And voila, open up for questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great lecture, Jen.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Needed that one. All right. Any questions, thoughts, perspectives, epiphanies?
Can you give us just a real quick, just so people know, what happened to Hypatia?
Yeah, Hypatia, she was murdered by the clergy. Little bits of glass tearing her flesh off of her. Yeah. Is a woman of great knowledge.
Was Cyril involved in that? Because I had read somewhere that the guy who became allegedly Saint Cyril was involved in that.
He's involved in that. And by the way, since we're here, I will tell you another story that people don't know, and that's did you guys know that Orestes was who was the administrator of Alexandria at that time, was in her favor and one of her patrons, and but the religious groups, especially obviously what will become known as the Orthodox, were very much against her. But a lot of people loved her, absolutely loved her. And she appealed to various people of all different beliefs and perspectives. She had in her school, which most likely was located in the museum, if you listen to Snetheus, who was one of her students, who became a Christian bishop later on, and his correspondence survives. You want to learn about all about her? Read his writings. They're still there. I think it's kind of cool. I'm upset that her letters have not survived, but at least we get the echo, so to speak. But very much the center of the intellectual set as established by her father, Theron. But what will happen is that she is murdered by basically a mob. And it was an illegal mob. And what you don't know is that Theodosius II did an investigation. You guys know? People don't know this. And he declared the action, even though he was a Christian, illegal, and had those people who were part of that exiled out of Alexandria. And he wished that he could have brought the others to justice. This is part of the story of Hypatia that nobody don't show that in the movie. You're like, because you're thinking, you hear the story of Hypatia, and you're thinking to yourself, such injustice, and the Christians really don't care, and they let this poor lady, go through all this. No, Orestes and the others, they all gathered together, including the emperor, and they did a full-fledged investigation. That would be a good movie, have a full story being told. But hey, it's not sensational.
I haven't even seen the movie, but I just my own reading over the years. But thank you, because I didn't know that last part. So thank you.
Nobody does. Yeah, nobody does. I think it's so interesting. I think that's even more interesting, the fact that they did an investigation. I could picture in the movie the court trial, because they did have one, going through the questioning process and start the movie that way, and then go back. Okay, sorry. $10,000. Maybe that's all. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions, thoughts? All right. Good. Did I seem to cover everything? Covered a lot of space. Yeah. So we have Julius Caesar, a non-event. Just so you know, you're going to see this in most textbooks. They will say it was burned during the time of Julius Caesar. So that's why I intentionally took you through all the sources. And you don't even have a reference, even 100 years later, to a fire burning any books. You just have, suddenly it's now spreading. And you can see how this idea starts evolving only 200 years later. Now all of a sudden, and basically what most likely happened is the 400,000 books in the warehouses burned that were being shipped out. And you hear the word books, you're going, books, that must mean the library. And then you build it from there. But it's interesting, that's how conspiracy theories all kind of form too. They have these kinds of roots, and then you just have to trace it. But I figured Julius Caesar and the soldiers with him, and people who lived there, and also the caretakers who were there at the time, probably know more than we do. And business went on as usual, without a hiccup. Any other thoughts? Any perspectives? All right. Wow.
I guess you got it.
I think I got it. Well, all right. Well, thank you for coming to my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if there's any other questions, get your time's worth. I'm here for you. But it's wonderful to see all your faces. And I hope that you will come again to my talk on mummification, because it will be as detailed. Maybe even more so, if you don't mind. If you love detail, you're going to get it here, I figure I always want to answer questions that people want to know. I've always been an inquisitive person with an insatiable appetite for knowledge, and so I like asking questions that are based on questions upon questions upon questions, and go down these various rabbit holes. And I love these little journeys and places I explore along the way, and I figure I'll take my listeners along with me as we go to all these different places, nicks and crannies and mysteries. And
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. I never know with my computer. So you had mentioned that Alexandria was the birthplace of a lot of things, like more of an understanding of human anatomy, and the one guy, I forgot his name, who estimated the circumference of the Earth. And
Aristophanes and particle physics. And
I'm wondering, are those
dictionaries.
innovations or discoveries exclusive to that region of the world, or were there other cultures like ancient China or the Mayans or Incans that were kind of made those discoveries on their own?
Yeah, you don't have a punctuation system that comes about. That's only Library of Alexandria. And then, of course, by the way, the punctuation system goes into the Arabic. So that it rises from there. So no, that starts there. When it comes to anatomy, that's again only there. Circumference of the Earth, it's there. Yeah, pretty much. A dictionary. You're going to have Chinese dictionaries, but not that early. You have dictionaries that go back into the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, but that's still after in a chronological sense. So that's after. So the first zoo. There's controversy over the first zoo. Some people will say that you're going to have a zoo-like place that was in the Mauryan Empire. There was something like a zoo. It turns out the Mauryan Empire's zoo in Pataliputra was about a few decades after the zoo in the Library of Alexandria, and it turns out most likely it was the library that influenced it. So fascinating. In fact, we can go there too. It's another wonderful talk. I'm not talking about India, but interesting stuff. So that's later on. So a dictionary, commentaries. Yeah, this is the beginning. Doesn't mean, be very clear, doesn't mean that the same idea that's not connected to the library didn't occur elsewhere, but still in chronological time it happened later. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you still have it later. The Chinese come up with quite a few ideas during the Han Dynasty. And the question is there a connection over the trade routes? That's a controversy, but it's still afterwards. They didn't have this during the Shang Dynasty, or this is making sense. So you don't have this. So that answers your question. So this is the first time for so much. Again, the fascinating part is the idea of the accents or the various markings go into various languages after this fact, even Middle Eastern languages. So, yeah. And one thing that happens, of course, again, we're going to have the Golden House under the, as we go through the Abbasids. This is very important. And a part of that legacy is you will have Aristotle. You will have these great scientific works. I didn't mention this, I should mention this right now, that those great works of that Golden House spread across North Africa. And, those ideas spread and arrived in a place later on. Of course, you guys have heard of Spain. So, even though this is during the Umayyad times, but also into the Abbasid, you have the same thing. But the Umayyads will take some of the knowledge at Damascus and bring them over to Spain. And then, of course, it'll be overlaid by the Abbasids later on. The influence will go crossing over. And so a lot of that ends up in Spain. And then with the Reconquista, that information then goes into Western Europe. A lot of these books were originally deposited in the Library of Alexandria. I'll be real boring again, is that, yes, obviously you're going to have lots of works. You're going to have all the works of Plato and Aristotle there. That's a given. What they also have there are a whole list of books that are Middle-Platonists and Neoplatonists. They seem to love those philosophies there. Tons and tons of those works, which I have right there, and that nobody wants to read. So we know about that too. Again, we're back to the problem of we have these books, but people just don't want to read them. They're not interested. And I think we're looking for something magical and mysterious. Maybe discovering something that's connected to Atlantis or something like that. And the other stuff that's connected to Atlantis, well, yeah, but not really. Atlantis is just a part of the conversation. It's not really, you're going to have references to ideas that are not necessarily well documented. Circumstantial evidence. You have to get into the mindset of those people at that time. And again, a lot of this wonderful materials, I say the best of the materials we still have to this day.
Huh.
Too bad.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did you think of the film Agora?
Okay, so I absolutely love the movie. I really did. I really do love the movie. And I own the movie. I watch it quite often. Obviously there's problems historically when it comes to her conics. Comes to, her Theon was connected to the idea of conic, looking into circles and cones and so forth in the mathematical sense. But I think that it would have been even more interesting if it went into some of what she really did talk about and really did study. We do have remnants of materials where it turned out that Theon was a great mathematician. And what she did is he was an expert at algebra. Okay? And what she did is that she took his additions and added commentaries on it because it's too hard for people to understand. It is that form of algebra that we inherit, the Arabs took and give back to us. It was her explanations that made that possible, that really made algebra more systematic, that went directly into the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and of course comes back to us. People don't know that. That was known then.
Well, that's part of the erasure of women from history right there, because,
Yes.
in school we're always taught that it was the Arabs who invented algebra.
No, Theon, the father of Hypatia, is the one, had it long before. He just made it systematic in the way that Euclid made geometry systematic.
Yeah.
Because ancients had geometry way before. I mean, you can see this in Egypt. Hello.
Yeah.
So it did exist. The idea of making it simplistic and making it put into a nice way in a book form. That's Euclid. And Theon, the mathematician, it was algebra. She clarified it, and then of course it went into the Arabic world, and it comes back to us. But she's part of that. I think that's interesting. Another thing that's important about it, and of course she's connected to the museum,
Yeah.
so it is part of this train of thought.
Well, now I have to see Agora. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good. And the other one is there's a whole bunch of Neo-Pythagoreans that are connected to the Library of Alexandria, and a lot of them are women, females who are part of that. And people don't know that either. One time I put together a long list of their names. People are going, I never heard of any of them. Again, erased, but talked about. That for some reason, because Pythagoras and his wife and their daughters were all into the philosophy, it became traditional for women as well as men to be part of that perspective. It's just Alexandria was so open to different perspectives, a lot of them ended up there and studying at the museum, and we have some of their writings. I even have a work by the daughter of Pythagoras on a breastfeeding the Pythagorean way. You just can't make this up. Yeah. So again, probably list of works you probably don't want to read, but these are the kinds of works that do survive. And a lot of Hypatia was into Neoplatonism, works of Hermes Trismegistus, and I can even put together her whole system of thought based upon not only Theon, but thank you, Snetheus. That's a hint. Read Snetheus, his letters, and you can parse out her whole philosophy by looking at the replies that he makes to her. I did that for a talk. I'm going to take Snetheus, and we're going to put together Hypatia based upon somebody who knew her. And I did that. Maybe that's a good presentation for me to do sometime here. If you guys are interested in that, I can do Hypatia, and I can talk about. Would you guys be interested?
We did a Hypatia once, but I don't remember if that we talked about that.
Yeah, so we could do, if you guys are interested in something like that, that would be,
That'd be great.
Yeah, so that way you can actually get to know her from people who knew her. And I think that's kind of cool. And so you'll like the movie.
Carl Sagan talks about her a lot too.
Who?
Carl Sagan talks about her a lot as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but she's definitely a worthy person to study. But and a lot of her beliefs are extremely mysterious. She is sort of a monotheist, polytheist. That's a whole another interesting bit too. She believes in the monad, or the one that emanates. It becomes the pleroma. It becomes a multitude. So that's why she was so acceptable to many Christian groups, because she's almost a pagan-like monotheist, sort of monotheist, but again, she's very much steeped in that perspective. Yeah, I guess I answered your question. Any other questions? That was a good one.
I had a question. You kept mentioning something that sounded like you said golden house. Is that right?
The golden house of the Abbasids.
With golden
so what happened is that during the Abbasids in Babylon wanted to collect all the knowledge of the world and put it into this great library, and being inspired by, guess what? And they collected as much as they could from all around, and this was a very important place. And then there were other libraries in what became Baghdad later on, and then unfortunately you have the Mongols destroying this in the 1200s.
Now Abyssine, I'm not sure.
Abbasids,
how do you
Abbasides, I think. I'm trying to think of the one or one. That's right. Abbasids, yeah.
I'll look that up.
Abbasids, yeah.
Would you be
Abbasids, yeah.
okay?
They're after the Umayyads.
The what? I'm sorry.
Umayyads.
How do you
Another
spell
group. Okay, so Umay, sometimes another Y, sometimes not. AD.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll look that up.
And they're based in Damascus.
Okay.
And the other will become Baghdad. Yeah.
I don't think we've done much talk on Damascus, their ancient culture.
Yeah. Damascus. Well, yeah. I mean, the Umayyads are pretty interesting, but yeah, they're interesting. What they do interesting about the Umayyads in Damascus, which was the capital. It had the largest in ratio. It was still a mostly Christian, even though it's Muslim, mostly Christian empire. There are more Christians there than Muslims all the way until the 1100s. Just throwing that one for free. It seems like the Crusades ruined everything.
Would you be interested in talking about that in the future?
Yeah. You're figuring this out right now, huh?
Would you be interested in talking about that in the future, or are you going to be too busy to write new talks?
I don't know. Maybe something. I've done the Crusades, but I don't know. We'll think about it.
Would you then want to, for September 9, reprise the 7 wonders of the ancient world?
I could do that. That sounds interesting to people.
That was a very popular one.
Sure. Yeah, that's fun. It's another fun one. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
If everyone likes that idea, I'll do that one for
So
September.
Hypatia and this one. Yeah.
Just sort of like, since we're in that area of the world, continue.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Oh
cool.
yeah. So any other questions? Good stuff. Everybody's brain's going, all right, stop. You need to stop. All right. Well, then I'm going to close it off. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope you enjoyed this evening, and hope to see you again.
All right, have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Night.
Thank you for being here. Thank you.
March